where we are stuck in the nightmare, we're in the nightmare because we feel the guilt, the shame, the regret, the blame, whether we're aware of it or not. We might be completely unconscious of it, but all you have to do is look at your world around you. If you're not happy with where you are, if you don't appreciate and feel grateful, if your attitude is in gratitude, then there's most likely something inside of you that is holding you back from that true sense of appreciation. And that's where the guilt, the shame, the regret, the blame is. So in thinking about Jupiter and Cancer, Jupiter is expanding our relationship to our past. It's like, where does this stem from? What is it, the root of the guilt, the shame, the regret, the blame? Once we get to that root and we can integrate those thought patterns and memories with understanding, forgiveness, and love for ourselves, then we're willing to really, doing the work to love ourselves becomes more elevated, maybe easier. And when you're in that frequency of self-love, that's when, instead of living the nightmare, the fantasy becomes reality. Welcome to the Weekly Transit, your guide to understanding the current planetary and astral alignments. Together, we'll explore how to harness these cosmic frequencies, empowering you to reach your highest potential as you navigate the days ahead. I'm your host, Scott Tajarian. Welcome to the Weekly Transit. This is the week of February 9th to the 15th, where we will be covering 7 transits this week, highlighted by Venus's transit into Pisces and Saturn's transit into Aries. Thank you for being here. I'm so grateful to have you listening and really excited to share the knowledge with you. I hope you were able to join Delisa Hawking and I. We had a really fun conversation with each other last week. If you missed it, the link is in the show notes, but we covered all the astrology for February of this year. Of course, if you want to really get insight into the astrology for the year, you can check out my 2026 astrology guide, which is available at theweeklytransit.com. To start the week, well, this week I'm gonna do 2 Substack essays, one at the beginning, one at the end, all the transits in between. The one at the end is going to be highlighting Saturn in Aries. It's taking a historical look at Saturn in Aries. The Substack essay to begin the week involves Mercury in Pisces, which is there for an extended period of time due to the retrograde. We talked about that last week, but this week we get into some of the historical implications, specifically around the triple conjunction. Mercury is going to form 3 conjunctions with the North Node in Pisces. It also forms 3 trines with Jupiter in Cancer. So we take a historical look at the last time that Mercury formed 3 conjunctions with the North Node in Pisces, and the last time that Mercury formed 3 trines with Jupiter in Cancer. Those are 2 separate periods. This year, it's happening. Those are both happening this year. So it's going to be really interesting to see what occurs. And yeah, thank you for listening to the Substack portion, for reading the Substack, for subscribing. Thank you to all my paid subscribers on Substack and on Spotify, because I am opened up paid subscriptions on Spotify, which includes what I am sharing on Substack. I've got free content, which is the historical view, and the paid content, which goes deeper into some of these specific transits and how to work with the energy. That's my 5 core question series. So let's dive in. What the depths demand. Mercury's extended transit through Pisces and the words history refused to bury. When the majority of people come to the conclusion that wars are nothing but a barbaric, unsocial, reactionary phenomenon entirely against the interests of the people, then wars will have become impossible. Rosa Luxemburg spoke at trial, Frankfurt Criminal Court, February 20th, 1914, 3 days after Mercury's first conjunction with the North Node at 15 degrees Pisces, a Gemini degree, the planet of consciousness at the degree of its own sign, prophesizing from the sign of the unconscious. Beginning February 6, Mercury enters Pisces and does not leave until April 14th. Over 2 months, the messenger of the gods, the planet of consciousness, communication, and commerce, the god of merchants and thieves, the guide of souls to the underworld, does not pass through the sign of the unconscious. It moves in. And when Mercury retrogrades through Pisces, making 3 conjunctions with the North Node and 3 trines with Jupiter exalted in Cancer, something changes in the way the world speaks, listens, and decides which truths are allowed to be heard. The last time Mercury in Pisces made 3 trines with Neptune in Cancer was 1836. The last time Mercury made a triple conjunction with the North Node in Pisces was 1914. Both configurations return simultaneously in 2026, and what happened during those transits will not let you look away. On February 24th, 1836, a 26-year-old lieutenant colonel named William Barrett Travis sat inside a crumbling Spanish mission in San Antonio de Bejar, surrounded by a Mexican army that outnumbered his garrison 10-1. When the enemy demanded unconditional surrender, accept or die by the sword, he answered with a cannon shot. Then he picked up a pen. The siege had begun the day before. It would last 13 days. On March 6th, Mexican forces breached the walls. Travis was among the first to fall, shot through the forehead on the North Battery. Every defender died, but the letter had already escaped. The letter he wrote that night was addressed to the people of Texas and all Americans in the world. 220 words. He closed it with a phrase he underlined 3 times: victory or death. Mercury in Pisces at 6 degrees, a Virgo degree, the energy of Mercury's own domicile, channeled something beyond military calculus. This was a man writing from the waterline of his own mortality, who understood that his words would outlive him. That letter rode out through enemy lines on horseback in the dark. Within weeks it had reached New Orleans, then Boston, then New York. Texas declared independence 6 days later. Mercury in Pisces trine Jupiter exalted in Cancer. When communication rises from genuine depth and speaks to the bonds of home, belonging, and emotional truth, it creates consequences no army can contain. But the transit that empowered Travis's letter also powered a darker message from the same American moment. The Texas Revolution was not fought solely for liberty in the abstract. Mexico had been moving to abolish slavery. American settlers in Texas, many of them slave owners, revolted in significant part to preserve the institution. The Republic of Texas's Constitution, adopted March 17th, enshrined the right to own human beings, while requiring free black people to petition Congress simply to live within its borders. The letter that rallied a nation to the cause of freedom carried in its wake the architecture of bondage. Mercury in Pisces does not discriminate between the truths you want to hear and the ones you don't. It delivers them all from the same depth. 5 days after Travis wrote his letter, the U.S. Senate ratified a different document by a single vote. The Treaty of New Echota had been signed the previous December by a minority faction of Cherokee leaders without authorization from Principal Chief John Ross or the Cherokee National Council. Over 16,000 Cherokee, nearly the entire nation, signed a petition protesting the treaty. Ross personally delivered it to Congress. The Senate ratified it anyway. One vote. The treaty became the legal basis for the Trail of Tears. When Major Ridge signed the document, he said, "I have signed my death warrant." He was right. Within 4 years, Ridge, his son, his nephew, Elias Boudinot, were assassinated by Cherokee who considered them traitors. The same Jupiter and Cancer energy that expanded Texas into a republic contracted Cherokee Nation into nothing. The transit that produced the most famous letter in American Revolutionary history also produced the legal instrument for ethnic cleansing. And the truths kept coming. While Travis was dying and Cherokee families were being counted for removal, Congress was deciding whether Americans could speak about slavery at all. Abolitionist petitions had been flooding the House. Thousands of signatures demanding the nation confront the institution that Texas's revolution was quietly protecting. Southern representatives introduced what the nation would come to call the gag rule. Every petition touching slavery would be laid on the table without being printed, debated, read, or referred. No further action whatsoever. Former President John Quincy Adams, 70 years old, serving as a Massachusetts congressman, rose to object. His colleagues shouted him down. The speaker refused to recognize him. Adams shouted from the chamber, "Am I gagged?" One transit, 3 documents, a letter that made Texas a home for settlers, a treaty that unmade the Cherokee homeland, a rule that made slavery undiscussable. All of them about who gets to speak, who gets to stay, and who belongs where. Jupiter, exalted in Cancer, is the archetype of belonging itself, and Mercury's message from the Piscean depths reveals that belonging in 1836 was being negotiated at gunpoint from every front. 78 years later, Mercury found the North Node waiting in the same sign. On February 20th, 1914, Rosa Luxemburg stood trial in Frankfurt Criminal Court. The charge? Inciting soldiers to disobey orders. In a speech the previous September, she had called on German workers to refuse to take up arms against their French brothers. The state called it sedition. Luxemburg called it conscious. Mercury had made its first conjunction with the North Node at 15 degrees Pisces, a Gemini degree, the energy of Mercury's own domicile. 3 days before she spoke, the planet of consciousness had merged with the point of collective destiny at the degree of communication itself. When the prosecutor called her a flight risk, she replied, "Sir, I believe you would run away. A social democrat never does. He stands by his deeds and laughs at your judgments. Now sentence me." They did. 1 year in prison. She served it, while the world proved every word of her prophecy correct. Within 6 months of the verdict, Europe was at war. Within 4 years, 10 million soldiers were dead. The same Piscean energy Luxemburg used for radical compassion, the instance that French workers and German workers shared more humanity than either shared with the generals sending them to slaughter, was the energy that nationalists across Europe used for collective delusion, wrapping imperial ambition in the language of patriotic duty. Mercury, conjunct the North Node in Pisces, offered the continent its destiny: compassion or the flood. Europe chose the flood. Luxemburg spent the war years in and out of prison. From her cell in 1915, she wrote the Junius pamphlet, a symptomatic indictment of the war and the socialist parties that had betrayed their principles to support it. She was released in November 1918 as Germany collapsed into revolution. 2 months later, on January 15, 1919, she was arrested by Freikorps soldiers, beaten with rifle butts, and shot. Her body was thrown into the Landwehr Canal. 1 week before Luxemburg trial, on February 13th, over 100 composers gathered at the Hotel Claridge in New York and found ASCAP, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers. Irving Berlin, John Philip Sousa, Jerome Kerr, artists organizing to protect their work from a world that had been exploiting it without compensation. Restaurants and concert halls had been profiting from live performances of their music for years, paying nothing to the people who wrote it. The law offered no remedy, so they built one. Mercury is the god of merchants as much as the messenger of truth. Pisces is the sign that rules music. And when Mercury retrograded back to the North Node at 14 degrees, the Taurus degree, the energy of money, the configuration was complete. The planet of commerce at the degree of material value in the sign of music, meeting collective destiny. ASCAP's insistence that creators deserve payment when their work enters the world became the foundation of every royalty system that exists today. Name the pattern plainly. When Mercury dwells in Pisces long enough to retrograde, the messenger of consciousness descends into the sign of the unconscious. What it finds in the depths, truth, terror, beauty, prophecy, demands to be spoken aloud. The transit does not create the message. It reveals who is willing to deliver it and who would rather gag the messenger. Mercury in Pisces does not ask whether you are brave. It asks whether you have something you love more than you fear the consequences of naming it. The last time both configurations arrived in the same transit more than once was 1374, over 6 centuries ago, in a year when Petrarch, whose letters helped launch the Renaissance, was completing his final correspondence before his death, when Catherine of Siena was being interrogated for her mystical visions before beginning her own letter-writing campaign to popes and princes, and when Chaucer was returning from Italy carrying the influence of the poets who would reshape English literature. Now they return. Mercury in Pisces makes 3 conjunctions with the North Node and 3 trines with Jupiter exalted in Cancer between February and April 2026. The energy that produced Travis's letter, the Treaty of New Echota, and the gag rule merges with the energy that produced Luxemburg's prophecy and ASCAP's founding. And Mercury enters this transit just days after Neptune departed Pisces on January 26, ending a 14-year residence in its home sign. The messenger of consciousness is not arriving in an empty house. Everything the god of seed deposited in the collective unconscious over the last 14 years, every illusion, every act of compassion, every dissolved boundary, is waiting to be named. You already recognize the deposits. The question of who owns creative work when artificial intelligence can generate text, music, and images from dissolved commons of the internet. Mercury is the god of merchants, confronting Pisces' erasure of the line between yours and mine. The question of what counts as your voice when it can be cloned, deep-faked, and deployed without your consent. The question of what speech is permitted and what is silenced, who decides and whose interests that silence serves. The gag rule in new clothes, now automated at scale. The question of who belongs where and who gets to decide. Jupiter in Cancer, the archetype of home, asking the same question it asked in 1836, while borders harden and families are separated in its name. The pattern does not tell you what will happen, it tells you what's at stake. In 1836, the stakes were a man's letter, a nation's forced removal, and the country's willingness to silence itself rather than confront its own hypocrisy. In 1914, the stakes were a woman's prophecy and an entire continent's refusal to listen. In both cases, the words that mattered most were spoken from the deepest place by people who loved something more than they feared the cost. Mercury enters Pisces on February 6th. It does not leave until April 14th. That is over 2 months in the deep. The question that Mercury in Pisces puts to every generation it visits long enough to retrograde is whether you will speak what you find or let the gag rule of your own fear lay it on the table unread, unprinted, unreferred, and silent. Travis wrote his letter knowing he would not survive the week. Luxemburg spoke her truth knowing a cell was waiting. Adams fought for 8 years, knowing most of his colleagues wanted him to stop. Major Ridge signed knowing what it would cost him. None of them had the guarantee that their words would be received, let alone remembered. All of them spoke anyway. What are you willing to say from the deep? And what do you love more than you fear saying it? The companion essay, Speaking from the Deep, 5 core questions for Mercury's extended transit through Pisces, takes the pattern this history has earned and turns it inward. 5 questions, your silence, your voice. The first transit of the week is the Sun in Aquarius, square the Moon in Scorpio. At 4:43 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on Monday, February 9th. So 7:43 a.m. Eastern Time. This is occurring at the 20th degree, the Scorpio degree. So there is a depth that is happening here. The depths of your secrets. Scorpio is the sign of secrets, and Aquarius is the sign of openness. The Sun is the planet of vitality. Aquarius is fixed air, symbolized by the water bear, ruled by Saturn, the planet of restriction, and Uranus, the planet of rebellion. The water bear invented the jug not for themselves but for the village. So the Sun transiting through Aquarius is bringing about light to the community, to the town square, while the Moon, the planet of emotions, in the fixed water sign, symbolized by the Scorpion, which is hiding, and ruled by Mars and Pluto, the gods of war and death. This square to begin the week, this half moon or quarter moon, is really asking you, what are you hiding from? What is being drawn into the light that you've been wanting to keep in the shadows? The tension is around the community or the group wanting to know and you not wanting to share. But maybe it's time to share. Or maybe not. But I'm curious to know how this transit is affecting you, if it's affecting you at all. Are you feeling called to share something more than what you are typically used to sharing within the group? And this builds through the week. This is how the week begins, but we begin the week with a square, we end the week with a square. And so this is kind of like tearing things open in a bit. It's like opening, you're becoming more vulnerable, more exposed here. And it leads us to the second transit of the week, which is Venus in Pisces. Venus is the goddess of love and beauty, the planet of relationships. Pisces is the mutable water sign symbolized by the fish and ruled by Jupiter, the planet of expansion and luck, and Neptune, the planet of compassion and delusion. Venus is exalted in Pisces. So Venus is in a position of power from February 10th to March 6th. That's when Venus is transiting through Pisces. Venus, the planet of relationships. Pisces, the planet of empathy. It's the final sign of the Zodiac, so it's carrying the weight of the 11 previous signs. So there is this empathetic vibe that's occurring here, and you can see why Venus would be exalted in this position, because in order to be a good partner, a good lover, a good friend, you need to have empathy for the people or the person that you're in relationship with. You want them to have empathy for you, but you need to have empathy for them as well. Now, the flip side of the coin is there may be confusion, illusion, deception that is occurring within these relationships. Maybe you feel like you're being taken advantage of by a lover, a friend, a business partner. You feel like, oh wow, I really feel what this person is going through. And so you bend over backwards to help them. But then there's no consideration in terms of what you're going through. So remember that the attitude is gratitude. And at the very least, if you are bending over backwards for somebody, there should be some appreciation. Is there any imbalance in your relationships? I love hearing from you. Leave a comment on Spotify or YouTube or wherever you're listening. Typically, I'm seeing comments on Spotify and YouTube about the episodes. But these are, I'm curious to know if you feel like there's an imbalance in any of your relationships, if you feel like you've been giving more than you should, you feel like you're being taken advantage of in some way. Boundaries can be a big challenge when Venus is transiting through Pisces. Boundaries in relationships. If you're feeling a little bit rigid, maybe you're somebody that does need to give more. Maybe you're somebody that does need to really feel what the people that you're in relationship are going through. and you need to support them in some way, just by having compassion for them. But be careful of giving too much. For those of you that were born with key astrological points or planets in Gemini or Sagittarius, there could be tension here around relationships. One specific example is everyone who was born between 1995 and 2008. You were born with Pluto and Sagittarius, so at some point, Venus is going to square your god of death, which means during this period from February 10th to March 6th, you may go through a breakup. Or at the very least, some form of transformation to your relationship energy that feels intense. That Pluto in Sagittarius, there is a will for honesty, directness, and truth, but there may be a lack of compassion there. And that's what Venus in Pisces is saying. It's like, okay, you can share the truth, but you need to have compassion and empathy in the way that you're sharing the truth, because if you share the truth too bluntly, then you have to be ready to take it from the other end, which may not be comfortable. The last few times that Venus has transited through Pisces, March 27th to April 30th of last year, 2025, Venus transited the last 6 degrees of Pisces from 29 retrograde back to 24 and then forward again. The last time that Venus transited all the way through the sign was January 2nd to February 3rd of 2025. The time before that was March 11th to April 4th, 2024. The time before that, January 26th to February 19th, 2023. And the time before that, April 5th to May 2nd, 2022. So think back to those dates for clues on what could be in store for you this time around as Venus transits through Pisces. I'm thinking about you if you were born between 95 and 08. And the dates that I just gave you, did you go through a relationship transformation during those dates? And it doesn't always have to be as big as a breakup, but maybe you went through, some sort of shift where you had to change the way that you related to others because you realized that there wasn't enough compassion. Maybe you weren't feeling enough compassion from them, or it could have been the other way around. So, curious to hear from you. The third transit of the week involves the Sun in Aquarius forming a sextile with Chiron in Aries at 23 degrees. 23 is the Aquarius degree. So we bring in the community. The Sun's already transiting through Aquarius, and this transit echoes the two transits last week, which were Mercury and Venus, when they were transiting through Aquarius, also formed a sextile with Chiron at 23 degrees. Sextile is a supportive aspect. This aspect occurs from Monday to Friday, so basically all week, February 9th to the 13th, with the exact sextile occurring on February 11th. So I think back to that first transit, which involved the Sun in Aquarius and the Moon in Scorpio, where maybe you were being exposed in some way to the group that felt uncomfortable. And thinking about the Sun's aspect to Chiron and Aries, and Chiron is the wound and the ancient wisdom which is unlocked through healing that wound. Aries is the cardinal fire sign symbolized by the ram and ruled by Mars, the god of war. So Chiron in Aries is bringing about insecurities or fear. It's bringing your fears to the surface. Maybe those fears came to the surface through the exposure of the Sun squaring the Moon, the beginning of the week, that you experienced that exposure, that vulnerability. It's like, oh, it's too much. But it revealed the fear, it revealed the insecurity. And the Sun in Aquarius, sextile Chiron and Aries can facilitate some of that healing. Maybe people in the group are like, look, we see your fear. And it's okay. It's okay for you to be afraid, or you don't have to be afraid, or we're going to rally around you and support you. But it's allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to be direct, to be authentic. The group needs you to be you. The group needs you to be you. Any good group is going to appreciate you for yourself. If the group doesn't appreciate you for being yourself, then you might be in the wrong group. And maybe that's some of what is coming up this week. Or you might realize that the group you're with is actually a really great group. And they're like, we want you to be you. Show yourself. It's okay for you to be afraid. We're here to support you and applaud you and congratulate you and just rally around you and let you know that we're grateful for everything that you bring to the table here. The fourth transit of the week and the fifth transit of the week involve Mercury. And this kind of harkens back to the essay read at the beginning of this episode. Mercury enters its retrograde shadow at 8 degrees Pisces, Scorpio degree, on February 11th, the same day that the sun in Aquarius sextiles Chiron in Aries. And later that day, after Mercury enters its retrograde shadow on February 11th, it forms that first conjunction with the North Node retrograde in Pisces at 9 degrees, Sagittarius degree. This is Tuesday to Friday, but the exact conjunction occurring on Wednesday, February 11th. So this is the first conjunction of Mercury in the North Node. The second conjunction occurs March 17th, and the third conjunction occurs March 22nd. But really, that conjunction, even though there are two other exact times that it is occurring, it's really something that you're feeling for, I'd say from... you're feeling this from like March 15th to the 25th. It's like a 10-day period, 12-day period where Mercury, even though it's not exact, it is forming a conjunction to the North Node in Pisces. This first conjunction happens at 9 degrees, and then the last two are at 8 degrees. So it's really helping you expand your mind, expand your awareness. Recognize where you are clinging too tightly to reality and not allowing yourself to cultivate faith that what is possible might be beyond your imagination. You might be limiting yourself. You might be too myopic in your perspective. This extended period of Mercury in Pisces, as we said last week, is about cultivating that faith, but you cultivate the faith through forgiveness. Forgiveness for the guilt, the shame, the regret, the blame. If you're blaming yourself, if you're regretful, if you're shameful, then there's no faith. Because faith says, even though it's really hard, whatever the experience is that brought about the guilt, the shame, the regret, the blame, there's varying degrees of where that stems from, but this transit is trying to help you see that there is a bigger picture, even if you can't see it right now. Whatever it is you're blaming yourself for, or someone else for, whatever it is you regret, whatever you're ashamed of, whatever you're feeling guilty of, The work here is getting to that point of forgiveness. Because without the forgiveness, there is no faith. Faith is a reminder that this happened and there's some kind of greater meaning there. Whatever that is. If you are feeling guilty, if you are feeling shameful, regretful, it's really just showing how much you care. So honor yourself for caring so much, rather than beating yourself up for caring. To care is to love. The sixth transit of the week is Saturn in Aries, which Saturn transits into Aries on February 13th, that's Friday, and is there until April 12th of 2028. So we've got 26 months. 26 months of Saturn in Aries. We had a taste of it last year. Saturn transited through Aries from May 24th to September 1st of 2025. But this is the planet of restriction, responsibility, hard work, achievement, authority, the god of wealth and time in the cardinal fire sign, symbolized by the ram, ruled by Mars, the god of war. This is the first sign, which represents the self. Over these next 26 months, we are all going to maybe go through some sort of an experience that requires us to restructure who we are, how we present ourselves to the world, how the world perceives us. What areas of your self-expression do you really need to cultivate? The work here is self-love. It's like the hardest job that we have to do is to learn how to love ourselves. And so you have the planet of work and responsibility in the sign of the self, which says, okay, so over the next 26 months, at some time, you're going to feel really defeated about who you are. And you're going to have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and love yourself. Even though you don't feel good about yourself. It's about being willing to do the work to cultivate the courage to be authentic. That's so important during this time period with Pluto and Aquarius. The Sun in Aquarius. Mars in Aquarius. In what ways can you stand forward within the community without trying to outshine everybody else, but to just be yourself? Do you have the courage to be authentic? Are you willing to put in the work to be authentic? So prior to May 24th to September 1st of last year, the last time that Saturn transited through Aries was April 7th, 1996 to June 8th, 1998, and then October 25th, 98 to February 28th, 1999. So if you were born within that time period, you are going to go through your Saturn return for the first time. The time before that was May 3rd, 1967 to April 29th, 1969. If you were born during that period, you are going through your second Saturn return over the next 26 months. And then the time before that April 24th to October 17th, 1937. January 14th, 1938 to July 5th, 1939. And September 21st, 1939 to March 20th, 1940. If you were born during those dates, then you are going to go through your third Saturn return. Congratulations. And these Saturn returns, the opportunity here is to level up, to focus on your soul's purpose. So collectively right now with the North Node in Pisces and thinking about that conjunction of Mercury and the North Node, the North Node is the soul's purpose, the karmic pathway of the soul. It's just so beautiful. It's like Saturn in Aries is really restricting our sense of self and love and appreciation so that we can work and cultivate on doing the work of what it means to love ourselves. But part of doing that and thinking about the North Node in Pisces is being willing to acknowledge the guilt, the shame, the regret, the blame. We all have it. I mean, I don't know. Is there anyone out there that never feels guilty for anything? I mean, I guess there's some narcissists out there. It's shameful, regretful. But I even think, narcissists may not be aware of it, but they do feel that inside themselves. It's in their unconscious, which is why they're narcissists, because they're afraid. They're afraid. A narcissist is not courageous. A narcissist is fearful. So the North Node in Pisces, and then the conjunction between Mercury. Mercury is making us conscious of where we are lacking faith, where we are stuck in the nightmare. We're in the nightmare because we feel the guilt, the shame, the regret, the blame, whether we're aware of it or not. We might be completely unconscious of it, but all you have to do is look at your world around you. If you're not happy with where you are, if you don't appreciate and feel grateful, if your attitude is in gratitude, then there's most likely something inside of you that is holding you back from that true sense of appreciation. And that's where the guilt, the shame, the regret, the blame is. So in thinking about Jupiter and Cancer, Jupiter is expanding our relationship to our past. It's like, where does this stem from? What is it, the root of the guilt, the shame, the regret, the blame? Once we get to that root and we can integrate those thought patterns and memories with understanding, forgiveness, and love for ourselves, then we're willing to really, doing the work to love ourselves becomes more elevated, maybe easier. And when you're in that frequency of self-love, that's when, instead of living the nightmare, the fantasy becomes reality. The final transit of the week involves the Sun in Aquarius, forming a square with Uranus in Taurus at 27 degrees. This, again, like the Sun forming the sextile with Chiron and Aries, is an echo from last week with Mercury and Venus, which, as they completed those last few degrees of Aquarius, also squared Uranus and Taurus. Uranus is the primordial sky god, the planet of revolution, rebellion, innovation, independence, the unexpected. Transiting through Taurus, the fixed earth sign symbolized by the bull. The tension here is between your self-worth, your values, and the group. Maybe your self-worth and your values don't align with the group. Maybe the group's values does not align with you. But there's some radical shifting that's meant to occur here. And at 27 degrees, this is a Gemini degree, it occurs through communication. It occurs through curiosity. Can you be curious about the group? Can you be curious about yourself and your self-worth? What inquiries do you need to make in order to determine and discern whether or not your values are in alignment with the values of your community or the groups that you're a part of? Where there is uncertainty, there may be an unexpected event that is meant to wake you up. This transit is occurring from Friday to Tuesday, February 13th to the 17th, with the exact square closing out the week on Sunday, February 15th. So, expect the unexpected, but be willing to lean into the changes that are occurring that may be radically different than what you are accustomed to. You want to open yourself up here. Be willing to share, to give back, to receive. That's the support of this final transit. And now, the final Substack essay of the week, Saturn in Aries, the discipline of courage, how the god of time enters the warrior's domain, and what every generation must answer when he does. This is only the beginning of the reckoning. This is only the first sip, the first foretaste of a bitter cup, which will be proffered to us year by year, unless by some supreme recovery of moral health and martial vigor, we arise again and take our stand for freedom. Winston Churchill, House of Commons, October 5th, 1938. Saturn at 14 degrees retrograde in Aries. Kronos devoured his children. The god of time, Saturn, the builder, the disciplinarian, the keeper of consequence, learned from prophecy that one of his offspring would overthrow him. So he swallowed them whole. He consumed the future to protect his authority. And it did not work. Zeus survived. The overthrow Kronos feared most happened precisely because he tried to prevent it. This is the founding myth of every Saturn and Aries transit. Saturn, the planet of restriction, responsibility, and authority, enters Aries, the cardinal fire sign ruled by Mars, the god of war. And the cosmos asks a question that no amount of caution can outrun. Where has your discipline become cowardice? And what has your refusal to act already cost you? When Churchill stood in the House of Commons to denounce the Munich Agreement, Saturn was not only retrograde in Aries, it was at 14 degrees, the Taurus degree, the degree of values, of what you possess and what you're willing to defend. Churchill was not making a military argument that night. He was making a moral one, a supreme recovery of moral health. The Taurus degree in the warrior's sign, asking the most Taurian question Saturn can ask. What do you value enough to fight for? Saturn at 0 degrees Aries strikes the Aries point, the degree that doubles the sign's energy, the most initiatory position in the entire zodiac. Events that begin here do not stay private. Saturn crosses this threshold approximately every 29 years, and history has been merciless to those who were not ready when he did. The appeasement cycle, 1937 to 1940. On April 24th, 1937, Saturn crosses from 29 degrees Pisces to 0 degrees Aries. The anaretic degree of Pisces, completion, urgency, the final breath of the old cycle, gives way to the Aries point in a single day. The collective wound of Pisces, suffering without boundary, the disillusion of an era that has not yet found the courage to name itself by ending. All of it concentrates into one threshold and then ignites. 2 days later, the Luftwaffe bombs Granada, the first mass aerial attack on a civilian population in history. The old world's suffering becomes the new world's war. Saturn in Aries creates restriction of the self, and restriction ignites fear. A fire can warm a room on a cold winter's night, or it can burn down the house. The transit does not decide which. The human does. In Berlin, Hitler meets fear by waging war on an entire continent. Aries fire given Saturn's structural machinery turned outward to conquer. In London, Neville Chamberlain becomes Prime Minister on May 28, 1937, and meets the same fear by retreating from it, letting the fire die rather than risk being burned. One burns down the house, the other lets the cold in. Between them, the transit waits for someone willing to tend the flame. Saturn settles into Aries for its main transit in January 1938. Germany annexes Austria without firing a shot. Chamberlain flies to Munich and signs away Czechoslovakia's sovereignty, declaring peace for our time. Meeting fear. One side advancing because it cannot tolerate vulnerability, the other retreating because it cannot tolerate confrontation. Then November 9th, 1938, Kristallnacht. Saturn at 12 degrees retrograde in Aries, the Pisces degree, the collective unconscious torn open, over 1,400 synagogues burned, more than 7,000 businesses destroyed, 30,000 men arrested and sent to concentration camps. One leader's fear turned to aggression, and another's fear turned to silence, converging at the degree of collective suffering. Saturn retrograde, delivering the consequences of every confrontation the world had refused to have. Buried inside this darkness, in December 1938, nuclear fission is discovered. Promethean fire, the stolen flame of Aries, energy that will end the war this transit is building toward and haunt every generation that follows. Saturn returns to Aries one final time on September 29, 1939, retrograding from 0 degrees Taurus back across the threshold to 29 degrees Aries, the anaretic degree, the Leo degree, completion, urgency, mastery, and the degree of the heart's power. At its highest, the Leo degree is mastery of the heart so total that power arrives without pursuit. At its lowest, the tyrant, resting on the throne while the kingdom burns. 3 weeks into a war that refuses to ignite, Saturn backs into the final degree of the warrior's sign at the degree that reveals who has done the heart's work and who is merely sitting on the throne. The phony war. When a member of parliament suggests bombing the Black Forest ammunition dumps, the Secretary of State for Air refuses because the forest is private property. Comfort mistaken for sovereignty. One man refuses to sit still. Winston Churchill had spent the entire 1930s in his wilderness years, warning about Hitler, calling for rearmament, being dismissed as a warmonger. A decade of Saturn's loneliest work, his love of England, of its people, its institutions, its future, would not be subjugated to his fear of conflict. He did not charge toward the fire because he lacked fear. He charged towards it because What he loved was worth more than what he feared. He did not chase the throne. He spent a decade mastering the expression of his heart so completely that when the moment came, the throne came to him. Saturn leaves Aries on March 20th, 1940, and within weeks, everything the transit had been building detonates. Germany invades Norway. Chamberlain falls. On May 10th, Churchill becomes prime minister, not during Saturn in Aries, but because of it. He did not emerge during the fire. He emerged from it. The lesson: the confrontation you refuse to have today will arrive tomorrow with compound interest. And the one who rises to meet it will be the one whose love was disciplined enough to walk straight through the fear. The Pioneer's Price, 1967 to 1969. Saturn enters Aries on May 3rd, 1967, and within a few weeks, the Six-Day War erupts. The summer becomes the long, hot summer. 159 race riots across American cities. Detroit alone, 43 dead, 7,000 arrested, 1,000 buildings burned. The Kerner Commission concludes that America is moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. Then 1968, the year the archetype splits open. The Tet Offensive, January 30th, shatters the illusion that America is winning in Vietnam. A war built on Saturn's structural power and Aries' aggression, deployed by leaders whose fear of losing global standing outweighed their love of the truth. Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated on April 4th, Saturn at 15 degrees Aries, the Gemini degree, the degree of the messenger, the voice, the greatest orator of his generation, silenced at the degree of communication. The forces that killed him were driven by the same Saturnian fear. Hoover's FBI had been running COINTELPRO for years, so afraid of the change King represented that it turned Saturn's structure into a weapon. Robert F. Kennedy is assassinated on June 5th, Saturn at 22 degrees Aries, the Capricorn degree. Saturn's own sign. Remember this degree. Nixon wins the presidency in November on Law and Order. Fear of change repackaged as discipline. Every one of these responses to Saturn in Aries was a response to fear. The question is what the pioneers built despite it. The Civil Rights Act of 1968 passes 1 week after King's assassination. 1 week. The bill had been stalled for months. King's nonviolent resistance, the most Saturnian form of Aries courage, disciplined fire that refuses to become destruction, achieved in his death what it could not achieve in his life. Not because the death was necessary, but because King had spent years building the structure his courage would fill. The marches, the organizing, the strategic confrontations with power. Saturn's patient architecture. Like Churchill, King's courage was not the absence of fear, it was love, of justice, of dignity, of a future he might not live to see, refusing to yield to fear's demand that he stop. The night before his assassination, King spoke at Mason Temple in Memphis. He did not know it was his last speech. He told the crowd he had been to the mountaintop. He had seen the promised land. He might not get there with them. The pioneer sees the destination. The pioneer pays the price. What the pioneer builds survives. What the pioneer does not. The warrior who builds the peace. 1996 to 1999. After 2 cycles that showed what fear can cost and what love can build, Saturn in Aries produces its highest expression. Saturn enters Aries in April 1996, and in Northern Ireland, the peace process enters its most dangerous phase. The IRA had broken its ceasefire with the Docklands bombing in February, right as Saturn approached the Aries point. For 2 years, hardliners on both sides responded to Saturn's fear the way every previous cycle had made familiar. Tighter grip, harder line, the conviction that only force answers force. They were not wrong about the courage it takes to fight. They were wrong about what courage is for. George Mitchell imposed a deadline, pure Saturn. The parties negotiated through the night beyond it, pure Aries. On April 10th, 1998, with Saturn at 22 degrees Aries, the Capricorn degree, the Good Friday Agreement was signed, the same degree where Robert Kennedy was killed 30 years earlier. Capricorn is Saturn's home, the sign of structure, governance, institutional endurance. Kennedy died at this degree fighting for a world built on justice. 30 years later, at the exact same degree, warriors on both sides of a 30-year war chose love of a future over fear of each other. More than 3,500 dead. Ended not by one side defeating the other, but by leaders on both sides choosing the most difficult action available, building with their enemies instead of burying them. The warrior who builds the peace, Saturn in Aries at its summit, and at Saturn's own degree. In May 1998, India and Pakistan both conducted nuclear tests. The Promethean fire of 1938 echoing exactly 60 years later. What we unleash under this transit does not disappear. It compounds. The pattern. 3 cycles, nearly a century, the same energy, the same fear. Saturn in Aries creates restriction of the self, and that restriction ignites fear. Those who met the fear with domination burned down the house. Those who met it with retreat let the cold in. Those who met it with love, disciplined, structured, unflinching love, tended the flame and built something that endured. Churchill in the wilderness, King on the mountain, Mitchell at the table. The transit did not create them. It revealed what they had already built inside themselves through years of quiet, unglamorous Saturnian work. Every Saturn and Aries generation discovers the same truth. Readiness is not bestowed, it is built. Saturn in Aries returns, February 13th, 2026. We had the preview. Saturn dipped into Aries from May 24th to September 1st, 2025, and every signature of the archetype appeared on cue. India and Pakistan exchanged military strikes. Iran, Israel escalated into American B-2 strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. Promethean fire again. A new pope was elected. Mass protests swept American cities. Global trade fractured. The preview showed us the exam. February 13th, 2026 is when the exam itself begins. The historical record is not a warning. It is an invitation. Every Saturn and Aries generation has faced the same fear and the same choice in how to meet it. Churchill's love of England overrode his fear of conflict. King's love of justice overrode his fear of death. The architects of the Good Friday Agreement chose love of a shared future over fear of their enemies. You are entering this transit now, not as a spectator, as a participant. Where have you been doing the quiet, unglamorous work of building yourself? The work no one applauds, the discipline no one sees. That is Saturn's gift. Where are you being asked to act, to confront, to step into the fire with something more than good intentions. That is Aries' demand. And what do you love enough to carry you through the fear? Saturn at the Aries point does not arrive gently, but it arrives for those who are ready. And readiness, as every generation that has lived through this transit can attest, is not something the stars bestow. It is something you build. I hope this message has been helpful to you. I hope this message empowers you through the week ahead. I'm so grateful for your presence here, and I look forward to reconnecting with you next week. Thank you for listening to the weekly transit. If you're curious to learn how these transits or any other transits may be affecting you, or if you're interested in learning more about your astrological code, contact me for a reading at theweeklytransit.com. This episode was produced by me, Scott Tajarian. Music written by Ben Leinbach from Listen Deep by Amber Herzog-Lyman. Wishing you all the best as you ride the planetary waves.